Thank you and welcome to my channel, Simply Your World, where we discuss past and present events that will affect you if they haven't already. Tonight we're going to be discussing a very controversial woman, very intelligent, but just as controversial. Prime example, her and her family were known as the children of the devil. And I'm talking about Margaret Sanger. If you want to see ideologies get challenged, if you want to see premeditated answers get cut off at the pass like a good chess match, then this is definitely the interview for you. Check this out, and this should be very, very interesting.
Now to our story. When Mrs. Margaret Sanger opened the first birth control clinic in the United States back in 1916, birth control was a dirty word. The police threw her into jail as they were to do 7 more times during her crusade, a crusade that still faces the reasoning but unalterable opposition of the Roman Catholic Church. That crusade kept Mrs. Sanger away from her children for long periods. It helped to break up her first marriage, and she suffered constant, harrowing social abuse. Mrs. Sanger, in view of all of that, let me ask you this first of all. Why did you do it? I realize that you had an intellectual conviction that birth control was a boon to mankind, but I'm sure that others have that conviction too. And so what I'd like to know is this. What events, what emotions in your life made Margaret Sanger a crusader for birth control?
Well, Mr. Wallace, it's hard to say that any one thing has made one do this or that. I think from the very beginning, I came of a large family. My mother died young, 11 children. That made an impression on me as a child. I was a trained nurse, went among the people. I saw women who asked to have some means whereby they wouldn't have to have another pregnancy too early after the last child, the last abortion, which many of them had. So there's a number of things that are one after the other that really made you feel that you had to do something.
There are some other possible reasons that suggest themselves on reading your biography by Lawrence later. Your mother, as you say, died prematurely after bearing 11 children. She was born a Catholic, was she not?
She was born a Catholic, yes.
And
in Ireland.
Your father was a sort of a village atheist who clashed with church authorities, and because of his atheism, his earnings dwindled under community pressure. You and your brothers and sisters were known as, quote, children of the devil, end quote. Could it be that in part at least, you were driven emotionally toward the birth control movement because of antagonism toward the church, because that was a way to fight the church?
With that question, he took her so far back into her past. She was not expecting that at all. And this is what I mean by cutting off predetermined answers at the past. That first answer, 11 children, she done told that to 1,000 people. Mike Wallace knew this, who was an excellent journalist. If you know anything about Mike Wallace, you know he gonna get down to the bottom of the story, right? He was not supposed to bring up that hurtful, very intimate subject when it comes to her past, her siblings. That was very hurtful. And this is where walls, and this is how walls get built up. And this is how walls get torn down.
No, I don't think I had anything of the kind in mind. I was what I would call a born humanitarian. I don't like to see people suffer. I don't like to see cruelty, even to this day. And in nursing, you see a great deal of cruelty and unnecessary suffering. At that time, there was no opposition as far as the church was concerned, any church. It was mainly the law, the federal law and state laws that one had to think of. The church was not in my mind at all.
Well, in going after your motive then, and I will press you just a little bit more about that and then get to the specifics of this evening, but in your motive, in the movement, is it possible that the movement itself, the feeling of wanting to do anything that you felt was important, that perhaps that moved you a good deal? Because the fact remains that you led a movement against overwhelming pressures that stemmed back for centuries, and in doing so, according to your autobiography, you even left your first husband. And you wrote this to a friend, Mrs. Sanger. You said, "Where is the man to give me what the movement gives in joy and interest and freedom?" Now, what was this joy, this freedom that you craved?
Well, I don't remember that letter, who it was written, but I think that it was not a question of marriage at all. There was a certain satisfaction in doing something that was going to alleviate the sufferings of women in particular, and I was quite a feminist at the time.
See, and there it is right there. I'm going to let it play, but there it is right there. Everyone knew she was a feminist. This is the origins. Her and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was the, I think, Supreme Court Justice as well. Them two women were almost like the godmother and the fairy godmother, if you what you want to call it, of feminism. Bader Ginsburg wrote books. She went on crusades and campaigns to get rid of children. She even left her husband talking about what can her husband give her that the movement can't. Nothing has changed. They have took quotes like this and pretty much just passed them along like a brigade through the decades just to get women up to date to still hold on to this same ideology. This is the reason why they're so quick to kill their children. This is the reason why everyone's so mad that there is no abortion, because if she had it her way, if Margaret Sanger had it her way, man, it'd be so many aborted children, more than what it is now. And the number now, you can't even count. It's crazy, man. Ain't nothing changed since this interview had started. Since her crusades started, nothing has changed but the times. That's it.
Mm-hmm,
and I naturally didn't want to see women take all the suffering of childbearing and of pregnancies. So it was a pleasure, in a sense, to think that you were striking at an archaic law, which it was. It was put on the statute books by Anthony Comstock some years ago, and no one had stood up against it. No one had tried to change the laws. And at that time, not even a doctor had a right to use the United States mails and common carriers for books, for learning, for anything that he had to do with this question. It was considered obscene. The whole question was considered obscene.
Mrs. Sanger, you have helped to spread the birth control movement not only here in the United States, but in Europe and the Orient as well. Why? Why is birth control of such vital importance internationally? Is it just to save women's suffering? Is that the only reason in your mind?
Well, not entirely. The population question is a great concern today, and the rate at which the births come in to we're saving them now. At one time, when children died, they didn't have the food. Mm-hmm. Today, our population all over the world is getting certainly better consideration and better conditions than they had at the time that I was there. I went to every country because I was invited. And I didn't go into the country myself. I was invited to go to Japan and to speak there, have 8 lectures on the question of birth control and peace.
Well, do you believe that birth control is essential if we want to keep millions of people across the world from starving? Is that your thesis?
Say it again.
Do you feel that birth control is essential to keep millions of people across the world from starving?
Well, I think that birth control, if you keep your population more or less static until you pick up your resources, certainly you'll keep prevent their starving.
Well, what's more important, birth control or picking up the resources?
And see, this is why I like Mike Wallace, because if you don't already notice, all he's doing is leading her down a path just to ask her the big question. Pretty much ask it in a chronological way, like a backwards type way, getting all her answers, her predetermined answers out of her head. Then he's going to come back with the big question and watch how she just starts staggering and stumbling. And she's going to get upset because you're going to hear the octave in her voice go up, her octave in her voice go up. You're also going to hear aggression start to enter into her speech as well, because this she was not ready for. And this is an excellent interview. Excellent journalism by Mike Wallace. I don't know if he's still alive. If he is, salute you. If he's not, R.I.P. Mike Wallace. Definitely.
Well, picking up the resources, there's just a limit to that, too. There's just so much. Take Japan. And she cannot feed. They've had the best experts come there when MacArthur was there. Mm-hmm. And the best experts say that they have 20 million more people than they can feed. She's got to be fed outside in some way. She's got to have that kind of help if she's going to keep from fighting.
But certainly around the world there is potential agricultural land that is not being properly used now. Just this past year, on May 21st, the New York Times summarized an important study of the world's food resources made by Professor James Bonner of the California Institute of Technology. Professor Bonner says the world is not using 1 billion acres of potential agricultural land, and he adds that if this land were used and present agricultural land were improved, the entire world could be fed adequately, even if the population increased by 1/3 in the next 50 years.
Oh, Mr. Wallace, you hear so many fantastic things of what can happen, what may happen. This and that, I've heard it for the last 30 years at any rate, of what could be done, but it's never done. And the thing is, what is it now? What have we got today? A very distinguished woman spoke to me about Arizona. And she said, I wish you wouldn't talk about population. She said, all the population of the United States could be put in one state. And I said, what state? She said, Arizona. I said, did you ever hear of caliche? She didn't know that I was talking about a delicatessen or what. I said, well, caliche is harder than any rock. And it is about 3 inches below the ground, where it looks beautiful. It looks as if you could have food. It looks as if you could have corn or wheat or cotton. But as a matter of fact, you have to dynamite caliche out of the ground in order to have a little shrub, have a little grass or a few flowers. So many problems that when it comes to that. And the demographers, I never heard of anyone that would agree with that we could have another in the world. Another third.
Well, you say that originally the opposition was in all law, and you have to fight against that. Today, your opposition stems mainly from where? From what source?
Well, I think that the opposition is mainly from the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church.
Of the Church. Well, now
hierarchy.
Of the hierarchy of the Church. You feel that the parishioners themselves, the lay people in the Church, are not against birth control?
I feel they come to all of our clinics just the same as the non-Catholics do. Exactly the same.
Well, let's look at the official Catholic position.
So now
opposition to birth control. I read now from a church publication called The Question Box. In forbidding birth control, it says the following. It says, the immediate purpose and primary end of marriage is the begetting of children. When the marital relation is so used as to render the fulfillment of its purposes impossible, that is by birth control, it is used unethically and unnaturally. Now, what's wrong with that position?
Well, it's very wrong. It's not normal. It's not, it has the wrong attitude toward marriage, toward love, toward the relationships between men and women.
Well, the natural law, they say, is that, first of all, the primary function of sex in marriage is to beget children.
Well,
do you disagree with that?
I disagree with it 100%.
Your feeling is what, then?
My feeling is love and the attraction between men and women. In many cases, the very finest relationship has nothing to do with bearing a child.
I think she knows where this kind of, but now she kind of knows where he's going with this, but she's too far out in the water now. I don't know if y'all seen that little look that she gave. She was like, oh yeah, this where you going with it? Start rubbing her chin like, oh, this nigga think he's slick. You know, but by now you pretty much deep in the shit now. So now you got to answer all your questions genuinely and without predetermined answers.
It's secondary. Many, many times we know that. You see your birth rate. You talk to people who have very happy marriages and they're not having babies every year. Yes, I think that's a celibate attitude. Surely.
A celibate attitude, but you agree that Catholicism, according to the tenets of Catholicism, they rule that birth control violates not only the Church's position, it isn't the Church's position, but they say that it violates a natural law, as I have just explained. Therefore, birth control is a sin, no matter who practices it. Now, the violation of the natural law, according, you certainly can take no issue with the natural law as the hierarchy of the Catholic Church regards it.
Well, I certainly do take issue with it. And I think it's untrue, and I think it's unnatural.
Well, let me ask you...
Everything bears it out that it's an unnatural attitude to take. And how do they know? I mean, after all, they're celibates. They don't know love. They don't know marriage. They know nothing about bringing up children or any of the marriage problems of life. And yet they speak to people as if they were God.
Let me ask you this question. Suppose a healthy a well-to-do couple, decide for some reason never to have children, use birth control all their lives, would you say that your methods are being misused, Mrs. Sanger?
Now, if they were intelligent people, and they had some reason for thinking of children as a responsibility, or some disease that they might have that they wouldn't like to pass on to a child, and I think it would be a very unselfish attitude for them to take if there is a disease.
No, I say a healthy, well-to-do couple. A couple that just doesn't want children, and for that reason they use birth control all the way. Do you think that that is a misuse of your methods?
I don't think it's a misuse. I think if they're intelligent adults, but they must know what they want. They must manage their lives themselves. And certainly there's enough in birth control than there is in other things that you might deny yourself.
I asked you your motives a little while ago at the beginning of the program, your motives in working for birth control as hard as you have for as many years as you have. You reject the principal Catholic argument against birth control as being totally invalid. What do you think is the reason, the motive of the Church in forbidding birth control?
You'd have to ask a Catholic that. I couldn't say what their motive is.
Well, you couldn't say officially what their motive is, but you certainly must have an opinion about it, Mrs. Sanger.
Well, I don't have much to do with the hierarchy, and I know that the people that come to our organization and want to have the same methods, or whatever it is that one can have to prevent a pregnancy, that those women will say to us, we ask their religion very often, and they say, I am a Catholic, I was raised in the Catholic Church, and my church is wrong on this. This is the one thing. I will never be anything else, but my church is wrong on this one thing. And that is said over and over and over again. So what the motive is...
Well, you won't hazard a guess.
I don't care to. Thank you.
See what I mean? Now do you see what I meant by the predetermined answers are gone? Now she can't even answer questions. Because everything she thought, I've been through this before. I done been through this before, right? But now she ain't been through this. Because all of a sudden, she don't want to answer the question. Her eyes are wide open. And if you remember, earlier in the interview, she was sitting back answering questions with her eyes closed. And she just kind of, rocking back and forth, talking from a memory standpoint. Boy, you start asking about them damn, about being children or child of the devil. And, coming up with different quotes from the newspaper. She's sitting back with her head turned. She talking snappy. She wiping her mouth like, oh, yeah, nigga. And I know I'm not the only one to see this. I can't be the only one to see her whole attitude shift. And last thing I'm going to say about in this segment right here, what Mr. Wallace is doing is pretty much showing, like the first question he asked, like a good paper, like a good essay. You know what I mean? Hit the thesis question, you got the body, then you got the thesis statement, the end statement, you got all those things just to prove your point, right? And then he brings it back on her. He's proven that everything she's doing is because of the church and her upbringing. That was the reason why he asked that question like he did in the beginning. Just to prove through questioning and her own answers that his theories and his research was actually true. Cold-blooded. This is a cold piece of work and a cold piece of journalism right here.
May I ask you why? Now, I know that in private and in public discussions, I think, prior to this time, you have been willing to state your understanding of what the motives of the church are, and now you would rather remain silent. May I ask you why?
Well, simply because I don't think that the church has changed in its attitude. Some of the hierarchy have changed their attitude. You can't say the same thing that you might have said a year ago or 2 years ago as to your belief, or as to your opinion. And
have you heard it said that the reason that the church is against birth control is because they want more Catholics?
I've read it.
Do you believe it?
Well, if you read their papers, where they point out Boston, that's what has happened in Boston and Massachusetts. They have simply outbred the Protestants, and they're in Boston and Massachusetts, they have control. I've read that in their own papers.
I see. Of course, the church's answer, and I read now from a pamphlet published by the Redemptorist Fathers in Missouri, says as follows. It says that point of view about wanting more Catholics is nonsense. Quote, the Catholic Church does not command Catholic husbands and wives to have even one child. The Church considers it more than normally meritorious for them to have no children. if they mutually and perpetually give up the use of the marriage rite for the love of God.
All right. I don't quote what they do, so I think that the question in my mind is that they do and order their own people to do as they wish. But I object to their having the same rules for people who are not of the same religion.
Well, they believe, you see, that it is a natural law, not a Catholic law, but a natural law, and therefore a sin not just for Catholics, but a sin for all peoples.
So basically what he's saying, if you didn't pick up on that, he's pretty much saying, for all these years, you've been talking shit about the Catholic Church. You've been talking shit about, ideologies and things like that. So now I got you in the hot seat. I'm asking you questions about it, or because I cut you off at the pass. Now I'm asking you real questions. Excuse me. You can't answer them, right? Only, and all your silence only is proving his point in the beginning. That everything that you're doing is because you dislike a certain section of the church because of your upbringing, and you're pretty much trying to uphold your dad's tradition of being an atheist. And all these things are flooding back to her, and this is something that she was not prepared for in no way. I promise you, no one outside of some of her family members has made her feel the way she feels right now. That's cold.
And I think that there are other religious groups, that very, very Orthodox Jews feel the same way about birth control. Let's look at another argument against birth control, Mrs. Sanger, published in Red Book magazine in March of 1956. It says birth control is a devastating social force which tends to weaken the moral fiber of the community. Immunity from parenthood encourages promiscuity, particularly when unmarried persons can so easily avail themselves of the devices. Do you doubt that?
I doubt it.
You do?
Certainly.
Then let me read from a news story in the Philadelphia Daily News on June 10th, 1942. The story quotes you as urging the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps to give its members, quote, preventive measures against pregnancy, end quote. And you add, quote, abortion and illegitimacy are bound to result if the government doesn't recognize human nature, end quote. In other words, you were not advocating Christian morality, but rather ways for single women to avoid bearing illegitimate children.
Where was this taken from?
Philadelphia Daily News, June 10, 1942, direct quote from Margaret Sanger.
I doubt it.
Man, look, man, I think everybody knows somebody like that, and you may be one of those people, that you just cannot fess up to the truth. They got a whole expose of an answer, of an interview you had in a newspaper. As intelligent as you are, as many interviews you done been on, as many public announcements you done been on, probably all on podiums talking to women with memorized speeches. Now you don't remember what you said in the newspaper? I don't know. Like this lady right here is just about fake as they come. Along with the feminist movement, you see why it's so fake. Because look at the matriarchs of it. They can't even uphold their own ideologies in the face of a man that's asking them real questions. Not somebody throwing them that oop and they can, well, I'm gonna make sure you say this and I'm gonna answer it like that. You're gonna say this and I'm gonna answer it like that. No, all that's off limits. The gloves are off and she is off her rocker. All her emotions are flooding back, and she's almost in fight mode, if you don't know this yet.
I don't believe I ever made such a remark.
Well, in the same vein, in your autobiography, which you cannot disavow, you wrote the following about sexologist Havelock Ellis. You said he's been able to clarify the question of sex and free it from the smudginess connected with it from the beginning of Christianity. Now, what do you mean by the smudginess connected with sex, and why do you blame it on Christianity?
Well, there's many reasons, of course, to say we have more records of it from the dawn of Christianity. And I think I was speaking of Havelock Ellis as having clarified the question of homosexuals, making the thing not exactly a perverted thing, but a thing that a person is born with, different kinds of eyes, different kinds of structure, and so forth, that he didn't make all homosexuals perverts. I felt that he helped clarify that to the medical profession and to the scientists of the world, as perhaps one of the first ones to do that. That was one of the things I meant in that.
Mrs. Sanger, do you disagree that Catholics, or do you feel that Catholics should not have a right to have a say when a city administration contemplates spending their tax dollars on birth control or the dissemination of birth control information, something that Catholics believe is sinful?
That they have a right to say what they...
Do you feel that they don't have a right to have a say when a city administration contemplates spending their tax dollars on birth control? For instance, here in New York, Catholics comprise about 45% of our population. They're the largest single group. Well, don't you think they should have the democratic right to lobby against having their money spent, their tax money spent, for something that they consider evil?
Well, I suppose they have a right. They certainly do it. But so have the others. They're only 45% of the population. That is not the majority.
But they have a right to get up and...
Certainly. I'd have no objection to their having saying that, but I think we should have the same right.
See what I mean?
I say we. I mean non-Catholics.
Well, of course, this is a little bit at variance with something that you told our reporter earlier this week. You said earlier this week, it's not only wrong, it should be made illegal for any religious group to prohibit dissemination of birth control, even among its own members. In other words, you would like to see the government legislate religious beliefs in a certain sense.
Where these strange things come to, that I said them is what I...
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Okay. Miss Sanger. So, he went from the newspaper, which wasn't as official. You can kind of dodge around that one. Then he hit her with the autobiography, like, now you wrote this. What you gonna say now? Then he come with more proof of her writings. Now she can't get away from him. Now she, where are you getting all these strange writings from? I don't understand. Bitch, you know where they come from. You know exactly where they come from. It come out the mind of the demonic shit, or it come out the mind of the demon you are. And you know she got to be some type of evil type spirit, because her ideologies have passed through generations and generations and generations, and it is still affecting women to this day. Ideology might be bigger than her. It might, something that's been coming through the ranks, and then she just happened to be just one of those vessels. Cold Peace, I told y'all, this is a crazy interview. If you haven't seen it before, leave a comment. If you have seen it before, please leave a comment and let me know what you're thinking.
I'd like to know when.
Well, now, you know that my reporter spent a good deal of time with you. He's a very accurate young man.
Yes.
And this is a specific quote.
Well, I don't think I said it quite that way.
What are your religious beliefs, Mrs. Sanger? Do you believe in a God in the sense of a divine being who rewards or punishes people after death?
Well, I have a different attitude about the divine. I feel that we have divinity within us, and the more we express the good part of our lives, the more the divine within us expresses itself. I suppose I would call myself Episcopalian by religion, and there's many other. If you travel around the world, you get quite a bit of the feeling of all religions have so much alike in the divine part of our own being. And I suppose you just couldn't put that in a book, or you couldn't put it into a phrase or a sentence.
Do you believe in sin? When I say believe, I don't mean believe in committing sin. Do you believe there is such a thing as sin?
Well, I think the greatest sin in the world is bringing children into the world that have disease from their parents, that have no chance in the world to be a human being, practically. Delinquents, prisoners, all sorts of things just marked when they're born. That, to me, is the greatest sin that people can commit.
But sin in the ordinary sense that we regard it, do you believe or do you not believe?
Well, what would they be?
Do you believe that infidelity is a sin?
Well, I'm not going to specify what I think is sin. I've stated what I think is the worst sin.
Yes, but then you asked me to say what, and I said what, and you refused to answer me?
Yes, I don't know about infidelity. It has so many personalities to it, and what a person's own belief is. I couldn't generalize on any of those things as being sin.
Murder is a sin.
Well, that's naturally thing. Murder was the sinner now. It's a terrible act.
Murder was the teacher.
In just a moment, Mrs. Sanger, I'd like to ask you about another social problem here in the United States, divorce. Nearly 400,000 couples get divorced in this country each year. And I'd like to get your views on the cause and possible prevention of this problem. We'll get Mrs. Sanger's answer to that question in just 60 seconds. Now then, Mrs. Sanger, there are nearly 400,000 divorces or annulments in America each year. What, and this is hard to do in the short time, of course, that we have, what would you recommend to cut down our divorce rate?
Well, as a great many of our clinics are including in the work that they do in birth control clinics, having marriage counseling. So when the woman or the man come and complain of their marriage on the skids, we invite them to come and have special talks with some of our psychiatrists or others who are making a study of that all over the country, where we have about 500 clinics. They almost all include marriage counseling and marriage erection.
May I ask you this? Could it be that women in the United States have become too independent, that they've followed the lead of women like Margaret Sanger by neglecting family life for a career? Let me quote from your biography describing your second marriage to Noah Slee. Quote, in New York, Mrs. Sanger maintained every clause of their compact of independence. They had separate apartments, they telephoned each other for dinner or theater engagements, or passed notes back and forth. Would you call this a sound formula for marriage, Mrs. Sanger?
Different people, yes. It certainly was for me and for my husband. We had a very happy marriage consulting. He had different friends than I had, and I don't believe in forcing. After all, we were two adults, and forcing your friends on another person who may have an entirely different outlook. It worked out very well.
I know that it did. You have two sons. One final question. You have two sons. How many children have they?
Would you like to see them?
I would indeed.
That's one of
How many children? That's 6 in this family?
5 boys and a girl in that family.
And in the other family?
2 girls.
2 girls. Miss Sanger, I thank you so much for taking time out and coming and talking to us here this evening.
And Mr. Wallace, I've never smoked. But I'm going to begin to take up smoking and use Philip Morris as the cigarette for me to take.
Well, I thank you very much, Mrs. Sanger.
Now, my goodness, man, that was so telling. You know, we seen, emotions get ripped out of closets. You know, you've seen past traumas be brought to the forefront. You've seen the origins of the reason why her thoughts are the way they are, her ideologies, her practices, because she was obviously traumatized as a child, had 11 kids, probably was kind of neglected a little bit, you know what I mean? I don't know which order she was. I think she did say what order she was, but nonetheless, she was in a house with 11 kids back in this time. I don't know how well off her parents were, but 9 times out of 10, she suffered a lot and had a lot of scrutiny in the streets due to the fact that her mother was the way she was and her father was the way he was, and they came together in this weird type of a union, you know what I mean? And no one approved of it. No one has to really approve of it. That's really their business. But do you see how her upbringing really affected her life and the lives of a whole bunch of women right now and men due to the fact of her ideologies of pretty much eugenics? You know, that's pretty much all I got to say about that, man. Very compelling interview. Please, if you made it this far, please hit a like, subscribe, share. Or mean nothing to you, but it means a lot to me. It doesn't cost you anything, but it means a lot to me, man. So if y'all can hit those buttons, that I really appreciate it. And until next time, see y'all later.